To News Desk, a new show from DW News. I'm Ami Isif.
And my name is Marcel Nadim Abourakia.
We take on one big news topic every week. We're going to have guests on the show. We're going to have analysts who are going to go as deep as possible into the question that we have. But we want you guys to help us ask the questions today.
Because this show is really about what you guys want to know. And you can do so in the chat. So feel free to ask any question you want, any comment you want as well. And we're going to take whatever you say and put it to our experts. And how that works, we're going to show you in just a second.
And don't forget to do the quiz. We've got a quiz going, and we're going to present the results during the show. That's always fun when everybody gets involved in that, because then we have actual valid test sets.
Scientific data.
That's right. Now this week, as we promised, we're going to go into a news topic, and this week it's Taiwan. We're asking the question, what is preventing China from invading Taiwan? Now, this is the biggest flare-up in tensions in the Taiwan Strait in the past 25 years, and we're going to give some background as to why that has happened, but also look at the question, why, if China is the military power in that region, if the U.S. has basically looked away since these military drills have been happening in the Taiwan Strait, what is preventing China from invading Taiwan? Because something is right now. But to give a little background on what we're going to be talking about, we have a video for you guys.
To bring everyone up to speed of what happened the last week.
总统与佩洛西议长莅临，各位贵宾请起立。Please rise.
Mr. President, how worried are you about the situation in Taiwan? Because China is kind of keeping a bit of a grip around the whole island now.
I'm not worried, but I'm concerned that they're moving as much as they are. But I don't think they're going to do anything more.
全面提升了部队联合反潜作战能力，以攻击目标，并展开综合防抗训练。
Now, Beijing is basically blaming the U.S. for escalating here in the Taiwan Strait. There is a status quo. There's a kind of daily life that has been going on for a long time now in Taiwan, and China has been saying that Nancy Pelosi's visit escalated, right? And on the other hand, Taiwan is saying that, well, actually China is using that as a pretext to carry out these drills, to show its might, to put pressure on Taiwan and the U.S. Because you couldn't carry out such sophisticated drills on a day's notice because of Nancy Pelosi's visit. So.
Yeah, as you said, it's a history that's been going on for quite a while. And maybe we should understand, where does this even come from? Like Taiwan, China's saying reunifying, that's a phrasing that they use quite often, but reunify what?
Right. So to give us background on what Taiwan is, the history of Taiwan, and how we got to the situation we're in now, we're going to have on Melissa Chan. You guys might even know her. She is DW Asia presenter, and she's also an independent reporter. She's written for the New York Times and The Atlantic and The Guardian. She's going to give us kind of the background. Then we're going to have on Bonnie Glaser, who's one of the foremost experts on this subject, on Taiwan, China, and U.S. relations. She's from the German Marshall Fund, and she's going to be giving us the geopolitical aspect, and we're going to ask her questions about the U.S.'s role, because that is very important to understand the situation there. And then finally, you can't really talk about the situation in Taiwan without looking at the situation there. We're going to talk about the 23 million people who live on that island and what life is like for them now that the situation has escalated in the past week. And we're going to be talking to DW correspondent William Yang. He's in Taipei. He's going to be waking up at 3 in the morning to talk to us. And so if you guys have questions about what life is like in Taiwan right now, you should save your questions for him, because he'll give us a great look at the situation on the ground.
I mean, maybe we even have people in the chat that are tuning in from Taipei or anywhere else in Taiwan. So feel free to give me a shout. You can tag me at Marcel Nadim Abourakia, and I'll get back to you. This is a big topic to tackle, right? We have great experts on, but we also have great people here in the studio. And just want to bring you in and kind of introduce them for a little bit. Hannah Costigan, news editor here. She'll kind of look at the overall and watch out that we don't miss anything. Then we have Felix Fiedler. He's our tech guy. If anything goes wrong, He's the guy you can flame in the comments.
It's never gone wrong before, that has it feels.
And
don't jinx it.
Since you're already so engaged in the chat, I want to first of all greet a couple: Nick Blaine, Justin P, Chetin Amsterdam, and I want to show you how this works. So I'm going to take a question that you guys have asked before, and I'm going to put it to Michaela Kavanagh. She's our news reporter here, news desk reporter. And she'll take a question up that is kind of looking at Germany more, because Jonas had asked previously, I'm curious if Germany is as dependent on Chinese factories and the Chinese market as they are on Russian gas, and if anything is done to prepare for likely decoupling. So kind of understanding what's Germany's role in this.
Yeah, right. So that's a really great question, and that is a question that people have been thinking about here. It's been on everyone's lips in Germany for the last week or so, week and a half, including the German government and the EU. The short answer is, Germany is dependent on Russia for gas, but Germany is dependent on China hugely for raw materials. So China is Germany's, number one trading partner for goods, and at least it was last year. And so, when we're talking about this, we're hugely dependent, and what we need them for, we need these raw materials and these rare earth elements for things that contribute to the climate, sort of the climate transition. So the clean energy transition, such as, electronic vehicles, cell phones, lots and lots of cell phone materials, solar panels, wind turbines, LED lamps, electric motors. So, this is something that's on the government's radar, as I said. And, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, who's the German president, said he doesn't want to leave Germany sort of vulnerable to blackmail by any country, he said. And so the name of the game is diversification, is what the German government is saying. And so they're looking to places like Latin America to see sort of where else Germany can who else they can partner with to get these raw materials that we so badly need, but maybe just, in a worst case scenario, might not be able to get from China.
So to answer Jonas's question, yes, very dependent, and yes, they have it on the radar, but not necessarily taken any measures yet as far as, break-in and communications or anything.
Yeah, not yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and kudos to Jonas for asking that question. You guys might not know, but we're based in Berlin, Germany, and we've been doing a lot of shows actually on crises and how they affect the globe, but also how they affect Germany. And it just seems that there's a theme here that wars are breaking out where Germany all of a sudden realizes maybe we shouldn't have been so dependent on this world power.
So good question.
Yeah.
Better late than never.
That's right. But the question that we're going to be focusing on today is what is preventing China from invading Taiwan? And to understand that first, we have to understand why people are talking about a possible invasion. What interest does China have invading this island that's off its coast across the Taiwan Strait? And to really break that down, we're going to have Melissa Chan on. You can come in now, Melissa.
Clap emojis in the chat,
She's
please.
been very patiently waiting in the wings for us to introduce her.
Hi.
She's a presenter for DW Asia, so if you guys have tuned into that channel, then you've probably seen her there. You might have also seen her work in the New York Times, at The Atlantic, The Guardian, a general expert on the region, and we're very glad to have you here, Melissa.
I'm excited. I'm excited to participate. Thank you for inviting me.
And greetings to Jonathan Fung. He's actually joining in from Taipei.
Wow, that's amazing.
To really get us into this topic, what I was talking about earlier is China's interest in Taiwan, and we have a clip that's kind of a collage of what Xi Jinping has been saying since 2019 about what China believes is the future of Taiwan.
Felix, can we, yeah?
Yep.
Are we hearing that?
Reunification with our best efforts.
Let's
because
start from the beginning.
Okay, pause. And restart.
We are willing to strive for the prospect of a peaceful reunification with our best efforts, because reunification through peaceful means is the most beneficial for both sides and the entire nation. But we will not rule out the use of force and will reserve the option of taking all necessary measures. The Taiwan issue is purely China's internal affair, and no external interference will be tolerated. No one should underestimate the Chinese people's resolve, determination, will, and ability to defend national sovereignty and territorial integrity. The historical mission of the reunification of the motherland must and will definitely be realized.
Much applause. That first clip was from 2019. The second clip was from October 2021, so just this past fall when things were also escalating a bit in the Taiwan Strait. This is President Xi Jinping of China, a growing superpower, not yet a superpower, but growing in military power. And what he's saying there, I heard two things. Basically, he reserves the right to use military force, and he says that one day Taiwan will be reunified, is the word he uses, with China. What interest does he have in reunifying Taiwan with China?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting, of course, is words are really important in this kind of story. And reunification certainly implies that Taiwan was once a part of the People's Republic of China, and that it makes a lot of sense for Taiwan to be absorbed back into China. But the fact is, and this is a historical fact, the People's Republic of China has never, ever controlled Taiwan in its entire history. So that's number one. We see reunification, unification. I think it's really important for journalists around the world to think about language when they talk about this, right? Even with the word unify, it suggests that there was a whole. That if you look at the history of Taiwan is not the case. The other thing is that I think we've learned from Putin that we should pay attention to what autocrats say, that we should take them very seriously. We should take them at face value instead of taking their words and then reinterpreting it to something that perhaps makes us more comfortable. He has said that he's not going to rule out the possibility of force. We should take that very seriously. The world should definitely take that very seriously. And I don't understand when there are people who poo-poo that possibility.
It seems like there's a lot of people, actually. I mean, but what you said earlier is really interesting, that the reunification itself is a myth, because Taiwan never was part of the mainland China. We have a reel, actually, an old TV reel that shows one of the first newsreels to cover the foundation of Taiwan.
Wow.
It was called Formosa back then, so that's how they referred to it in this reel. But if we could play that, then we can talk about that.
Sure.
Stronghold of the Chinese Nationalist Army carries on with feverish preparations for repelling the long-expected communist invasion from the mainland. Mock raids and mechanized maneuvers all express the heroic determination of Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek to fight on, whatever the future may hold.
So that was back in 1949, and they were already talking about the possible communist invasion from mainland China. What has happened since then? Just generally, you don't have to give us that. Can you explain world history since 1949?
Give us the history of Taiwan.
I mean, 2 minutes.
You mentioned Formosa, right? That's a Portuguese word. I mean, it's really indicative of Taiwan's complex history. It has been controlled fully or partially by so many powers, whether it was the Europeans and in the 20th century, it was a colony of Japan. What we just saw in terms of the black and white footage is the fact that there was a civil war in China after World War II, and the losers, basically, the Kuomintang, moved and fled to the island of Taiwan. And so there became a sizable group of people who considered themselves Chinese living on Taiwan. Of course, you have to keep in mind, though, it was not a vacant island beforehand. There are there is an indigenous population. And there are people who've lived there for many, many generations. So it's an island with a complex history, and it really, I think, goes back to, I think the most important thing is to stop talking about history to an extent and just keep our eyes on the ball. The situation here is all about self-determination. You have a group of people, 23 million people, who want to mind their own business, and that's it. That should be good enough without having to, I think it's very, I mean, we see this in many conflicts around the world where authoritarian states or any party starts drawing on history, right, to sort of validate or substantiate their control over an area. And I think that, you know, the values of, I think the most important values is, or are, self-determination for people, right? And what do people in Taiwan want? They do not want to have anything to do with the People's Republic of China in terms of political control.
But Taiwan itself has its own kind of founding myth, right? And it calls itself the Republic of China, and also makes claims to some kind of reunification itself, doesn't it?
I mean, so Republic of China is something that the losers of the Civil War set up. And this was not in cooperation with any of the people living there at the time. And for many, many years, Taiwan was administered as an authoritarian state. It wasn't until much later that the democratic process, and in fact, it had its first elections in 1996. So this is a young democracy. People have died for this democracy. There was no conflict in the classic sense of a war, but people had to stand up and fight for where things stand today in Taiwan in terms of the freedoms it has. I mean, of course, I'm sure a lot of people know this. Taiwan is a very progressive and liberal democracy. It's the first place in Asia where same-sex marriage was legalized. It has universal health care. Some other things that I think people need to also understand, because there are a lot of people who don't understand that, this truly is a de facto independent state. When you pay taxes in Taiwan, you're not paying to Beijing. You're paying to the government of Taipei. You have your own passport. You have, like I said, universal health care. Did I say that? I don't know if I... Okay, so yeah,
That's good to know.
There's universal health care. It's a system, right, set in place. It has its own country code when you call, right? And actually, here's a fun fact. Like, when you're in Beijing and you want to travel to Taipei, there were direct flights pre-COVID. In fact, a lot of direct flights. You still had to pass through the international terminal in Beijing. So no matter what the Chinese government rhetoric in Beijing says, they acknowledge, even if they don't want to. I mean, if they were adamant that Taiwan is a part of China, then you would be taking a domestic flight. But they're not, are they? So that's an interesting fun fact.
There's a lot going on in the chat. A lot of people agree with you. And there's a ton of people like TSP who actually want to understand the U.S.'s role in all of this, because he or she is asking, will the U.S. defend Taiwan militarily when it comes to the point, and kind of getting to what's the U.S.'s policy in all of this?
The U.S. does not have a policy to automatically defend Taiwan militarily in the event of an attack, and I think that's something a lot of people don't necessarily understand. There is an agreement to provide Taiwan with help and assistance in the event of an attack. And this involves, over the years, a lot of sales of military equipment from the United States to Taiwan. So that's the short answer. I'll keep it short because it looks like there's a lot more questions. But maybe to go a little further, right? Like, Biden has spoken and misspoke, or said 3 times. He suggested that the United States would come to Taiwan's defense in the event of a military attack, only to have the White House staff quickly walk it back. So Biden is known for misspeaking, and a lot of people aren't necessarily... The first time he did it, it was, Biden being Biden, misspeaking, right? Second time, the third time he did it, people were wondering, so the U.S. has a policy called strategic ambiguity, but people were saying, man, this is a little too confusing. It's like strategic confusion. What are you trying to say here?
There's nothing more ambiguous than saying something 3 times and taking it back every single time.
Well, others have taken it back for him. Maybe to follow up with another question from the community, Jim Flagg asks, was China doing these drills for the world or for their own people?
That's a great question. I think both. But if you wanted to weight it, there's certainly a lot of performative actions that the Chinese state does for its own people. I mean, in many ways, Beijing has kind of put itself into a corner because the propaganda in China is so strong. I mean, even very progressive Chinese, like say someone in China who believes in LGBTQ rights, right? But if you talk to them about Taiwan, it's like one of those conversations you just can't have Like, it just automatically is Taiwan is a part of China. This has been instilled for years into the patriotic education there. It wasn't always the case, by the way. This was not always the case since the inception of the People's Republic of China. This is something that has been markedly pronounced over the last 20 years. So then you've created a population of nationalists. That's what you wanted, and now they want blood. It is shocking, the number of people in China, when I was based there, that really truly believed that it was worth spilling blood, killing people in Taiwan in order to retake it. It is. I think that's something that we don't emphasize and the world doesn't know enough. And of course, in a country of 1.4 billion people, you're always going to find people who don't disagree, right? People who are against an invasion of Taiwan. But it is mighty scary, the number of people who believe that Taiwan is a part of China and that it will, if necessary, they are okay with a military invasion.
Yeah. Well, you said the myth that China is using, this idea that they were once unified and they want to reunify them, that this is a myth that's been built up in order to encourage Chinese to support the government's plan, basically, to take over Taiwan. But if we do talk about history, and we did mention that it was a military dictatorship in the beginning, very much so supported by the U.S. military. There was a military base on the island, which doesn't exist anymore. But in the beginning, the U.S. did have hopes that if they could keep this kind of Taiwan as the resistance to the communist takeover of China, then one day Taiwan would be the launch pad of of turning China back into a partner of the U.S., right? So this is, even though this is not what Beijing talks about rhetorically when they talk about reunifying Taiwan with the motherland, is that not the consideration of China, that Taiwan isn't just minding its own business, but that is part of the design of the U.S. to maintain dominance in that region?
I think in the early years after World War II and the Civil War, that certainly was the case. But the big moment was when the United States broke diplomatic relations with Taiwan, Republic of China, and switched over to the People's Republic of China. There was a big desire from Beijing at the time to do that precisely because they didn't want, well, one of the many reasons, right? But yeah, early on, there was this idea that Taiwan could be a launch pad, but Taiwan has moved on. It's a generation of young people who've never lived in China, was never born in China, mostly, right? Maybe some there's some exchanges and stuff like that, but people have their own identity. Let me just give you an example. In polls right now, more than 90% of people in Taiwan consider themselves Taiwanese. Less than 5% of people in Taiwan consider themselves solely Chinese. Now, this number was not the case 20 years ago. With time, the place has developed its own identity. It always had a separate identity, by the way, right? I don't want to be misconstrued. And especially after democratization, they're looking across at China, they're looking at authoritarianism and going, we have nothing to do with this place.
We have a tweet, actually, from the president of Taiwan. What I find interesting about this, if you could just already share your screen, I've highlighted the word that she uses very often, status quo. So she tweeted this after Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan. If you hear a speech by her or if you read a tweet by her, this is the most used word. She always says that to talk about what her demands are, basically. What does status quo mean to Taiwanese?
So Tsai Ing-wen here is basically saying that she's just not going to do anything that will upset or rock the boat, right? One big fear of Beijing is that Taiwan declares independence. I said earlier, it's a de facto independent country. But it's never declared itself as such. And Taiwan has, or China rather, has always said that this is one of the red lines. You cannot declare independence. If you do, it will be fire and brimstone. And Beijing has accused Tsai of fomenting independence, of being pro-independent. And so this is something that she has really adamantly said, because also there's misinformation campaigns and disinformation campaigns that say that people in Taiwan want to declare independence. So that is a misunderstanding for a lot of people in China, is that they think all these people in Taiwan are ready to declare independence. And that's actually not the case. Again, in polling, the vast majority of Taiwanese understand that declaring formal independence would be really dangerous. I mean, look what happened when an 82-year-old woman wearing pink showed up in Taiwan. China has lost its, Pelosi.
Oh, you mean Pelosi?
I mean, Pelosi,
whoa,
right?
Another story. I didn't know she was wearing pink. I was like,
she was wearing pink. She was, anyways.
That's my style.
It is. You are wearing pink. So yeah, I mean, if China's lost its shit over this thing, right? Imagine what would happen if Taiwan did declare independence. So this is Tsai saying status quo, nothing is going to change. We're not changing the goalposts, and reiterating that, and also countering the propaganda.
Now, part of the status quo is also that Taiwan is the leading force when it comes to semiconductors. And Chetin Amsterdam, Jim Flagg, and Coffee Time say, well, the main reason to answer our question why China hasn't invaded Taiwan yet, they're saying at least, well, because they say it's about the chips. And if Taiwan cuts off China from the semiconductor chips, this would destroy China or eventually really hurt them. So is that maybe also part of the reasoning that nothing from the status quo is moving because they really have some leverage there?
It's really hard to say, right? I mean, one reason why Xi Jinping might be not making a move right now is because he's still in a period where he is sealing his leadership position in China. He's going through a process. He's about to get his third term and then will be leader for life, dictator for life, right? So that could be one consideration from Beijing. I mean, part of the problem with all this, right, your big question, what is preventing China from invading Taiwan, right, is we just don't have insight into the Chinese leadership and the thinking from Xi Jinping. He could be thinking about the semiconductors. And I want to emphasize to people, this sounds like semiconductors, who cares, right? This is so important. It is like Russian energy, for the EU. It is that important. What's the big deal? Taiwan makes the world's most advanced semiconductors. The semiconductors Taiwan makes and Taiwan pretty much alone makes. I mean, there's lots of other countries that produce semiconductors, but they do the most advanced ones that go into U.S. military jets, right? So it is gold. It is extremely valuable, and if the semiconductors stopped being manufactured in Taiwan, whether there was a blockade or there was conflict, this is not going to impact just the United States. It's going to impact the EU. It's going to impact everybody. It is the developed world's version of the grain being stuck in Ukraine.
92% of the highest developed semiconductors come from Taiwan, and the other 8% come from Korea. So you really see, as Melissa just said, it plays a big part to answer our guys' questions. And it also plays a part for, as she said, the rest of the world. I saw one of the, there's these kind of play-out simulations, and it said, well, if these semiconductors are cut off from the market, there's going to be a huge loss in the world economy. So it plays a role for the rest of the world.
Guys, I just want to move things along here because our next guest is waiting, and we only have her for a limited amount of time.
That's right. If you said, Melissa, that no one has insight into what China is thinking, but if someone does, it might be Bonnie Glaser. She's from the German Marshall Fund, director of the Asia program, and let's just bring her on. It'll be great to get her perspective on what is preventing China from invading Taiwan. Now, we were just talking about various topics. We were talking about the history of Taiwan, and what I want to start off with you about, we have an actual graphic that we've produced that compares basically Taiwan's military with China's military. If we could pull that up, we can just look at the discrepancy here. China is completely dominating Taiwan's military. If you compare the two, active personnel 2 million to 169,000, tanks and artillery 15,000 to 2,700, total aircraft, China's dwarfing Taiwan, and also in the naval ships, submarines a little bit less. Taiwan has quite a few submarines, but all in all, it is a bleak picture for Taiwan if it was completely by itself. So given that it's not Taiwan's military which is preventing China from invading, what is preventing China?
Well, thanks so much for the question. Obviously, first, great graphic, but Taiwan has 23.5 million people, and China has 1.4 billion. So it's not surprising that Taiwan's military is much smaller. But I think actually the answer to your question as to what is preventing China from invading Taiwan is that the invasion of Taiwan, the use of force against Taiwan, is truly a last resort for China. They want unification by other means. They have tried using carrots and sticks. They have given incentives to Taiwanese businessmen, to students. They really want to win without fighting. They want to instill a sense of psychological despair among the people of Taiwan and convince them that, they just really don't have any other choice, that the future will be better for them and their children if they just simply agree to integrate with China. So the use of the buildup of China's military capability is really to deter Taiwan from going independent. It is certainly to deter the United States from intervening. It is there as a last resort, and there may come a day when China chooses to invade Taiwan. But I believe that the exercises we've seen over the last week were not a prelude to an invasion. They were a warning signal to the United States, to Taiwan. You raised the issue earlier of the domestic audience. Yes, they were also to placate the domestic audience, which is angry about the Speaker of the House of Representatives in the U.S. visiting Taiwan. And of course, they were exercises to perfect China's capability to conduct joint operations, to impose a blockade, and take other measures against Taiwan. So they serve multiple purposes.
Hey, Bonnie, there's a lot of questions for you in the chat, especially when it comes to the military side of it. And I want to ask one of them from Anozimir. The question is, how many troops would China need for a successful landing, and how many can they actually transport over there?
Well, that's a great question. I think most people say they would need at least 100,000 troops. The second half of the question is hotly debated. So if you focus only on their Navy amphibious landing ships and their transport vehicles, you would have to conclude that they don't have sufficient lift capability. But some experts argue, and I think this is very much an argument that is worth considering, that China really plans to use what we call its white hulls, its Coast Guard, its law enforcement vessels, as well as its maritime militia. So that includes lots of fishing vessels. And that this isn't like a temporary plan for China that it's using while it builds bigger transport ships, that actually this is its plan. That China often relies on its maritime militia and its law enforcement ships to conduct missions in the South China Sea. So why not in the Taiwan Strait? So there are people who argue that the PLA is capable today of transporting a very large number of soldiers across the strait, perhaps enough to seize and control Taiwan.
Now, I want to follow up on that because I read it before from the chat. People were saying, yes, maybe by numbers, the Chinese army is big, but by experience, it's actually lacking a lot, because the last war, like proper war that the Chinese military was involved was the Vietnamese War, which was in like the late 70s, early 80s. So does that play a role that they really have no experience, and especially when it comes to Taiwan, which is a very difficult kind of mission to invade Taiwan as a whole? Does that play a role, or do the simulations suffice?
Well, I think that the Chinese military, what they write about their own capabilities, suggests they understand they have deficiencies. There are areas where they really do not have the most advanced capability. They have just really begun in the last few years to conduct joint operations. They are implementing defense reforms. They're trying to adopt more integrated command and control, but it's hard to get services to work together. It's taken the United States a very long time to really perfect that ability. So it is definitely a challenge, and the military knows it's a challenge. That said, if the Chinese Communist Party decided today that the legitimacy of the party was in jeopardy because Taiwan had declared independence, or because the United States said it would no longer have a one China policy if we decided to recognize Taiwan, then I think if the PLA is told to invade Taiwan, it will do so, whether it is ready or not.
And I just want to remind people in the chat, and if people who are just joining us, what we're talking about today is what is preventing China from invading Taiwan. And I think the reason, while we're so focused on military too here, I mean, the first question is what is preventing China from invading Taiwan? And you said, well, they want to do it peacefully. But I think in the back of everybody's mind is, if Xi Jinping has said many times that Taiwan will be reunited with China, with Beijing, and Taiwan is moving only further away from the idea that they would ever let that happen. I mean, the polls show that there's an overwhelming majority of people there will never accept being reunited with Beijing, and are also building up their military to make sure that doesn't happen. Aren't we avoiding the topic if we say that there won't be a clash someday? Because, right, if Beijing says, well, we prefer to do it peacefully, and Taiwan is like, well, we're never going to do it peacefully, then I think that's why so many people want to talk about the military here, because it seems like the logical conclusion.
So let's unpack this a little bit. I mean, first of all,
it's an authentic question. Yes, I would love to hear why we shouldn't worry about a world war in the next year or two.
Well, definitely not in the next year or two. So
okay,
most people in the United States,
that's relieving.
Most people that I talk to who are expert on this area believe that the real threat might be coming later in this decade or in the early 2030s. We're really not talking about the next year or two. You have to think about Xi Jinping's cost-benefit calculus, and you have to think about the risks. If he invades and he loses, what's the impact on China's the party's reputation at home? Would the party be seen as having not defended the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the nation? That could affect his position in power, or even party rule. And then in addition to that, there's the cost of the reaction of other countries who would probably forge an anti-China coalition with the United States. The world would turn against China. So China wins Taiwan, but it loses its ability to achieve its global ambitions. And let's remember that Xi Jinping's most important global ambition is not only to amass great power and possibly even become a superpower, but it's national rejuvenation of the country. That's the goal for 2049. That includes becoming a leader in innovation and technologies, for example. And those sets of goals, all of the goals associated with national rejuvenation, would be put at risk if China uses force against Taiwan. So I think you really have to get into how Xi Jinping thinks about the costs and the benefits. I do want to say that what Xi Jinping has said about Taiwan, it's really important to look at all of what he has said, and he has said very little. That's first point. Most of what he has said has been said by prior leaders. Reunification is inevitable. It is a historical mission of the Chinese Communist Party. Use of force is on the table, not ruled out, but peaceful reunification is the path that they would prefer. Now, all of these things have been said for years. Xi Jinping has said two things that prior leaders did not say. First, in 2013, he told a prior vice president of Taiwan, when he met with him on the sidelines of a regional meeting, he said, we really shouldn't pass our differences down between Taiwan and mainland China from one generation to the next. And then he said at the 19th Party Congress that national rejuvenation can't take place without reunification. And that has suggested for the first time that there's actually a timeline, and that has really worried people. But I'll bet you by 2049, Xi Jinping won't be ruling China. He's going to be like 95. So if we look at actuarial tables, it'll be someone else. Xi Jinping cares about what he does while he is leader of China.
I think that question, the reason why I asked it too, I think it's on everybody's minds that we've just seen an authoritarian ruler invade a country, Ukraine, with almost complete disregard for the consequences. And I think that's what shocked everybody, to think maybe we are living in a world where war doesn't mean what it used to, that you could lose everything by making the wrong calculation, because we've seen Russia just play its hand there. And so I think a lot of people are worried that China is going to do the same. But what I'm hearing you say is that it's not the same country, not the same ambitions, and perhaps a completely different calculus.
Now, one of the questions from the chat was, you kind of breezed...
The short answer, of course, is China is not Ukraine, Taiwan is not Ukraine, China is not Russia.
Exactly.
So very different scenario in a way. You kind of breezed over one point, which Josh was asking in the chat, is the ambitions that China has in terms of technology. And he's asking, technology, what role is technology playing in all of this? Because as far as I understood it, China wants to be the world leader, or maybe even is the world leader when it comes to technology. Like, what role does it play in the conflict with Taiwan?
Well, frankly, technology is central in China's conflict and competition with the United States, far less so with Taiwan. This is an issue of who will be the technological leader of the world. So if you go back to 2015 and the Made in China 2025 plan that Xi Jinping rolled out, you can see these 10 really central areas of strategic technology that China wants to be dominant in. And semiconductors is one of them. And of course, Melissa Chan talked about that. You guys mentioned, I think, 92% of the most advanced semiconductors are produced in Taiwan. So China is dependent on them. The United States is dependent on them. So is everyone else. China's not going to go to war over semiconductors. That's not its main concern when it comes to Taiwan. So I just don't think that that is the most important thing in Xi Jinping's calculus. But when it comes to the U.S.-China competition, Xi Jinping has figured out that technology is absolutely crucial for developing advanced capabilities and for competing with the United States around the world. So they're investing huge amounts of money in artificial intelligence, in machine tools, and a whole lot of areas.
So what I've understood so far is there will at some point be some sort of escalation, but to get back to the question that we want to ask, basically, why has China not invaded Taiwan yet, is they weren't ready yet. Is that fair to say?
I think I said more than that. It's not just that they're not ready. They want to solve their problem with Taiwan without using force. That is their preference. They don't rule out use of force. There might come a time where they feel they have to use force, but they have not decided that they will use force, and it's not their preference.
Okay.
We actually have a map that I would like to bring in now. When we're talking about why war would be, why China stands to lose through war, why that would not achieve their aims either in the immediate or the long term, we want to kind of look at the situation that they're facing in the Pacific if it did come to an open conflict. Do you have that, Michaela? This basically, first of all, outlines where they've conducted military drills. So that's been this past week where China has landed missiles in the sea, in the Taiwan Strait, and also around Taiwan, completely surrounding the island. And that gives you an idea of how close Taiwan is to China. But if we zoom out, here are all the allies of the United States. The United States is still the dominant military power in the Pacific, and these are all the countries that would essentially come to the U.S. and Taiwan's aid should it turn into a military conflict. And there again, this is the vast Pacific Ocean that divides the United States from China. And if you can just get a perspective of how far away the United States is from this area of the world that they are still dominating militarily, But what we've seen in the past few years, the past 10, 20 years, is that China has gained military dominance in that area in a way that wasn't perhaps expected before. And in relation, the U.S. is losing dominance. Is that why we haven't seen a reaction to these drills around Taiwan? Is this an indicative of the U.S. kind of looking away?
No, absolutely not. The United States is certainly going to react to these drills. When you showed the map, I think you said that U.S. allies, would get involved in a war in the Taiwan Strait, and I do want to put a question mark on that. Mm-hmm. South Korea, Philippines, Thailand certainly not getting involved in a war in the Taiwan Strait.
I mean, we don't know if the U.S. would get involved in a war in the Taiwan Strait, right?
I believe that as the U.S.-China relationship continues to intensify, the likelihood that the U.S. would come to Taiwan's defense will grow exponentially. This has been the trend, I think, in recent years. So Taiwan, of course, is important to the United States because it's a democracy, because it's our ninth largest trading partner, because it sits off the coast of China. But, importantly, if we did not come to Taiwan's defense, many of the countries that you showed on that map would question whether the United States is, in fact, a reliable ally. After all, we have treaties with those countries that obligate us to come to their defense if they are attacked. So I have, no doubt that the pressures that are building on the United States and the trajectory of the U.S.-China conflict really makes it ever more likely going forward that the United States will come to Taiwan's defense. The only country, really, that you showed on that map that has a vital interest in Taiwan, particularly strategically, is Japan. Mm-hmm. It is an existential issue for Japan. Taiwan sits in the middle of the first island chain. It is very close to Japan's southernmost island. And the Japanese have really just had a wake-up call in recent years. And the map that you showed with the closure zones where the missiles landed, one of those it overlapped with Japanese exclusive economic zone. This is the first time ever that China has launched missiles that have actually splashed down in Japan's exclusive economic zone. And there were 5 of them. And so I think this is actually going to really galvanize Japan to do more, to prepare to defend itself and perhaps to defend Taiwan.
Bonnie, this is Melissa. Hi, how are you? I know you have to get going very, very soon, but I want to ask a question that's been posted in the chat from the community, and it's something, of course, that you've taught me to always think of and consider the Taiwan perspective. The question is, what is Taiwan's best move right now moving forward?
Oh, that's such a great question, Melissa. I think that Tsai Ing-wen has, made some statements about Taiwan is not being provocative. Taiwan just wants to preserve the status quo, which you already talked about earlier. Taiwan doesn't want to be seen as doing anything that could cause a clash. But they've already started their own exercise. These were planned months before, no doubt about that. But, what Taiwan really needs to do is make itself, we use the term, a porcupine, hard to take control of, hard to land on. I would like to see the Taiwanese people be more like the Ukrainians, which, of course, didn't happen before the invasion, but it was afterwards. They put up such a huge resistance, and it has turned out to be really just decisive in the ongoing war in Ukraine. I would like to see Taiwan establish a territorial defense force. They could learn from Finland and Sweden and the Baltic states. There's so many great models. United States does not serve as a great model in that regard. But I think that if they could strengthen deterrence by just demonstrating their will their resolve, and their capability to defend their own territory. So that's sort of what I would like to see Taiwan do going forward. But they also, they recognize that they just have to sort of keep their head down now while the United States and China get through this series of exercises.
Bonnie, we have so many questions for you, and we're going to call this segment Quickfire Questions, because I'd love you to answer as briefly as possible. I know that sometimes this is difficult in these geopolitical issues, but if possible, you could. So League of Aram asks, what do you think of China's next step would be after those drills?
I think that China's going to try to incrementally change the status quo in the Taiwan Strait, which they have already done in the East China Sea with Japan around the Senkakus, in the South China Sea with the island building and the militarization, and that they've done on the Sino-Indian border. So they're going to start nibbling away at Taiwan's ability to control its own airspace, sea space, its ADIZ, and put more economic pressure on Taiwan.
That was on time. Josh asks, are we underestimating Taiwan's military just like how we did with Ukraine's?
I wish we were underestimating Taiwan's military, but I actually think that Taiwan has not done enough when it comes to implementing defense reforms. And they haven't always procured the right military equipment that would be mobile and lethal and survivable. So I think Taiwan has more work to do. But I do think that their military is committed to fight. And I think that, it's a matter of allocating their resources allocating their resources more effectively and purchasing more asymmetric equipment. And as I said, maybe beginning to train civilians how to shoot rifles and how to do military first aid and things like that.
Yeah, I've actually read it. They call it beauty shopping. So they buy very nice military equipment, but it really doesn't serve their purpose. Mira Roa asks how the situation in Taiwan is different from, for example, Transnistria, a region that we haven't spoken about yet.
What's that region?
Transnistria. So the region between Ukraine and Moldova.
How is the...
I can step in and
well, I think
let me answer it after Bonnie. I know she's got limited time, but I can answer and deal with that question in a few minutes.
For the community, we have answers for everyone. That's the message here.
That's right. We have so many more questions for you, but we know that you're very busy right now, and we just want to thank you for being on the show. And it's great to have you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me.
Bonnie Glaser from the German Marshall Fund, director of the Asia program there. Thanks again.
Bye.
Yeah, I mean,
Phyllis and Melissa.
I got through about half the questions I wanted to ask her. I know there's just so much to talk about here, but I think the comments and the questions from our chat were really on point. I think there are a lot of people who want to make comparisons with Ukraine. Kind of what I learned from her is that it's not so easy to compare Ukraine and Russia to Taiwan and China. Obviously, you have a completely different country there. Russia and China have never been similar, although we could classify them as authoritarian. They have a very different logic in how they deal with global politics. Did you want to take a crack at the Transnistria question?
I mean,
She was really confused.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I know a little bit more about Transnistria than Bonnie, it appears, perhaps because I am based in Europe. But again, it goes back to what I said earlier about Taiwan. I mean, Taiwan is the 21st, I think, largest economy in the world. Okay, so I don't know where Transnistria stands, but it's not even listed, right? Because it is not de facto independent in the same way Taiwan is, right? I don't know if Transnistria has its own call code, but Taiwan does. Its own military, a pretty large military, even though it's small compared to China's. But there's so many things about Taiwan that makes it a de facto country in a way that Transnistria is just simply not.
So comparisons really don't work. But another question that kind of goes towards comparison from Pinta Santa, they want to know, can you maybe outline for us whether sanctions from the US and the EU are maybe scaring China from attacking Taiwan? So the way we saw now, basically NATO sanctioning Russia and really hurting its economy and kind of limiting the progress. Is that something that Taiwan sees and they're like, actually, they have quite a united front there that will hurt us as well?
Yeah, not NATO. You mean the EU?
The EU, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see it glass half empty, glass half full, right? Like, it might be a warning to China just how certain parts of the international community, right, mostly OECD countries, unite behind sanctions that are damaging. But you can also see it as looking at how the EU is responding now, how Germany is responding now, how painful it is for everyone that these sanctions are taking place and that trade with Russia has dipped, right? And China is a much larger economy than Russia's. So it's almost like, don't you dare. Do you dare actually sanction us? Because the ramifications will be so much worse than what people in Europe are experiencing now. So I think it's a double-edged sword, and how Xi Jinping sees it is anybody's guess.
Yeah,
I guess what the feeling I'm still left with, even after that discussion, and I know that Bonnie Glaser has a optimistic outlook on the fact that the status quo could continue for quite a while. But what makes me pessimistic is just this idea that, like, China and the U.S., most analysts say that there's going to be a clash sometime between the two powers. The U.S. has basically existed since World War II, believing that it's the only force in the world that it can dominate any region and decide who gets to win and who gets to lose. And I think China is kind of pushing against that idea that the U.S. can dictate what happens in the Pacific, and I just don't see a peaceful resolution of this conflict in the long term. But do you... How do you feel about that? Do you think there is like the chance of a peaceful resolution of this conflict?
I mean, nothing is inevitable. Yeah. I think that the conversation sometimes unhealthily focuses on conflict. But I also understand why, right? Like, it's certain people's responsibility in different countries, whether the United States, Taiwan, or China, to think about the worst case scenario in terms of military conflict, right? That's just part of a nation's job. But I don't think it has to be inevitable. Nothing is. Maybe there's a milder leader after Xi Jinping. As Bonnie referenced, he would be in his 90s for that 2049 deadline for national rejuvenation. Right. So maybe there's a more chilled out dictator or autocrat. I mean, I know that sounds crazy, but like, yeah, I mean, there might be a more chilled out guy in charge or woman in charge in China. Very unlikely woman, but
I just want to pass over to Michaela at this point because she has the results of the poll we ran at the beginning of the show, and we might get into that with you, Melissa, as well.
Melissa, are you ready for the results of our poll?
I think we're all...
Maybe repeat the question from the poll.
Okay, I'm going to repeat the question. The question that we asked our audience, our community, just before the chat before we went live was, which of these countries has recognized Taiwan's sovereignty? So we have Germany, Denmark, Vatican City, and the United States. So I won't leave you guessing. I mean,
I like the little pause and suspense.
Should I keep you guessing?
There was someone in the comments that they kind of not cheated necessarily, but they basically saw the poll and they're like, guys, can you help me? Can anyone post the right answer?
We love that collaboration. Yes, okay.
Ask Jeeves.
Okay, so 40% of the users said that it was, in fact, the Vatican City which recognizes Taiwan's sovereignty. And only 13% of our nearest and dearest friends said Germany recognized Taiwan's sovereignty. And actually 35% thought that the United States did indeed recognize Taiwan's sovereignty. And only 12% thought Denmark did. So those are sort of surprising numbers. I'm surprised by how many people actually knew that the Vatican City did recognize Taiwan's sovereignty.
This is officially like official diplomatic relations, because obviously the people who responded saying Germany and the U.S. were right in the sense that when people talk behind closed doors, they of course recognize its sovereignty. I mean, you can just guess that. You know that that's how they talk about it. But it's a little bit like Schrodinger's cat, you know, this experiment where they said, okay, if there's a cat in this box, we don't know if it's dead or alive, so it's both dead and alive. This is kind of the feeling I get when we talk about how the U.S., its relations with Taiwan, because it's so obvious why the U.S. does not recognize Taiwan's sovereignty. It's because it doesn't want to pick a fight with China. It's not because of...
Well, most countries don't recognize Taiwan,
sorry,
right?
you're shaking your head.
Yeah, it's super complicated, but Let's hold that one.
Okay.
Okay, so I do want to play, I mean, speaking, if we're on this topic, I wanted to play this clip that we have of the WHO. So it's not just, nations that are not recognizing Taiwan sovereignty, it's international organizations like the WHO. And we have this pretty juicy little clip of someone from Taiwan doing an interview about coronavirus. Hong Kong, sorry, pardon me, yes. And then this journalist asks about Taiwan and the situation there, and well, let me play the clip. Okay, I've got it up.
Michaela,
Taiwan's membership.
Did he freeze?
Hello.
I'm sorry, I can't hear. I couldn't hear your question.
Okay, yeah. Let me repeat the question.
No, that's okay. Let's move to another one then.
Right, because I'm actually curious on talking about Taiwan as well, on Taiwan's case.
Wait till he left the chat.
You can see him like.
We decided to give Dr. Alward another call to follow up.
And I just want to see if you can comment a bit on how Taiwan has done so far in terms of containing the virus.
Well, we've already talked about China, and when you look across all the different areas of China, they've actually all done quite a good job. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much for inviting us to participate, and good luck as you go forward with the battle in Hong Kong.
I mean, that's pretty brutal, right?
Yeah.
Melissa, what do you make of that?
I mean, it made the rounds, that's for sure, when it happened, and it made the rounds in Hong Kong and China and Taiwan. Yeah, I mean, this is something that Chinese diplomats, this has been a strategy of Beijing that I think, frankly, the United States was slow on. I mean, which is that they've been very aggressive, very strategic about participating in the international institutions that, frankly, in the post-World War II period was set up by the United States. And so you have a lot of representation at the UN and at UN organizations like the WHO, where there are a lot of Chinese diplomats that put a lot of pressure. So they've played, they've gotten into the international game, international institution game. Keep in mind, like, remember Donald Trump, he turned America back and withdrew from these organizations and basically ceded territory to the Chinese to allow them to push their agenda. Right? I mean, in many ways, as you referenced, for a long time, the international order was set up by the United States and allowed the United States to push its agenda. And we see a D.C. now much more insular, at least under the last president, that allowed the Chinese to actually move in. And they are involved in the Human Rights Council, for example, in Geneva. And I can list on and on. There's all these sort of international organizations that govern, like the internet, the flights, international flight, and they've been very, very engaged. I mean, Beijing.
Now, two things I want to mention. First of all, we asked a question, kind of like a bonus question in the chat, whether anyone knows how many other countries have officially recognized Taiwan. And Gustavo Palos, who some might remember from the first episode. So I was there.
You remember.
He actually guessed it right. He's like a DW super fan. He says 13, which bonus claps for you. You knew the right answer. And the second thing that I actually want to pick up on, what Melissa said is kind of this, like, the idea of when the US is kind of taken aback and maybe not filling the role in its place anymore, who maybe steps in? And Surav is asking what role other Central Asian countries might play in this case of if the US stays inactive, what role can they play?
We have William. He's coming in with us?
Yes, he is.
Okay. So we can
answer that first and then bring in William?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Do you want to answer
that? So the question was about the other Central Asian countries, what role they could play in the future.
I mean, Central Asia geographically is too far from Taiwan to really be a player, and they are kind of stuck. Their concern is actually managing the relationship between Russia and China. They're kind of stuck between these two powers in terms of how they orient themselves. So I don't think it's a calculus in regards to Taiwan. Short answer. Yeah.
What I think is interesting, just picking up from this WHO clip where one of the I think, leading. He's an advisor to Tedros. Sorry, I can't pronounce his name on camera. The Director General
Tedros,
of the World Health Organization. So he's a very important guy in the World Health Organization, and he can't even answer a question on Taiwan. So that makes me wonder what life is like in a country, and to maintain a status quo that excludes you from important organizations like the World Health Organization. Now, there's other organizations, councils on human rights, which perhaps it's unfair to be excluded from those, but when you have a global pandemic and you can't even get a straight answer from one of the advisors to the Director General of that organization, it seems like it could turn into a humanitarian crisis at some point. So that's the status quo in Taiwan right now, just accepting that you're not part of the global community. So I want to bring in William Yang because he is in Taipei, woke up at 3 a.m. to do this interview with us, but he's a very dedicated journalist. He's been on DW News very often recently, but for a while now, right, William? You've been with DW for a while. Yeah. And we want to just get from you, first of all, what is the situation right now, just generally?
So I think the situation here since Pelosi landed, or even before she arrived until now, has relatively remained calm. People have not really, been saber rattling or feel really panicked, even though there have been 6 days straight of Chinese military exercise around Taiwan. And the proximity of these exercises from experts' analysis is dangerously close, and they've been running all different kinds of scenarios where miscalculation could have happened. But I think Taiwanese people have been really used to this kind of increased intimidation from China on a day-to-day basis. So for them, when they what they felt like is these military exercises are more like more signals from Beijing, stronger signals from Beijing, rather than thinking that Beijing is really on the doorstep and trying to pushing with their armies, because they still trust the government's assessment, and they also feel like Beijing is not completely ready to really do the final move yet, because there are other factors that they consider that will be holding Xi Jinping back, or at least make him think twice before he actually does that. So people here decided that, instead of being too overwhelmed by these potential doomsday scenarios or the potential of an invasion, they should just move on with their lives. But at the same time, keep an eye on what's actually happening around the neighborhood.
Keep calm, carry on situation. We actually have some impressions from people in the streets in Taipei. If we could play that. This was done a couple days ago, Hannah told me, but it gives you a sense of what people are feeling after the drills at least started. We need a second to pull that up real quick.
Now, in the meanwhile, maybe, William, I'm really interested, because for me it's crazy to understand. In Taiwan, when these military exercises happen, what's the situation like? What's the are people scared, or how do they react? Because it seems, at least when you cover the news, it seems really dramatic, and you look at, you see jets flying, and
I think a missile even flew over the territory.
A missile flies over the territory, which clearly you will see. There's all these ships. Do people change their behavior then, or how I'm really interested, the first reaction, what do you do?
So I'll probably take the first day of the exercise as an example. On that day, it was also happened to be the Chinese Valentine's Day. So instead of actually caring too much about the 11 missiles that was fired by China, and 4 reportedly flew right over Taiwan, people still go on very romantic dinners with their couple, partners, and people were shopping for fancy stuff for their girlfriends, and there were people buying flowers to go home to celebrate this very special day. And very few people were actually huddling together and trying to turn on the news and watch everything. So I think it's that you can say it's a desensitization from all these years of intimidation like moves made by China, but it's also, I think, just the coping mechanism from Taiwanese people, because they know that this is an escalated version of the response, and they consider this as Beijing's way to really try to implant more scare or like more fear into their mind, rather than already, trying to shoot the missiles directly at Taiwan.
Right.
Because, like China had fired missiles before in 1996, even though it's not as dramatic and as close as this time. But for them, this is just reminds them of China's way of trying to stop Taiwan from engaging with the international community. And both times it happened to be the result of Taiwan trying to engage with the U.S. at a very high level.
We have the interviews ready for you, so we can just play those real quick.
Worried about a possible war.
I can't predict if a war will break out or not. I don't want to think about it. If it happens, it happens. I'm not too worried about it. Thinking about it too much doesn't really help.
They've been saying it for a long time. China has said they will attack us, but it has never happened. This time they probably just want to scare us. My kids are worried about war. They asked if war was possible here and where to hide. I told them where the shelters are, but we have no control over it. I don't want to worry about something that I can't control.
Now, one of especially the first commenter was a bit, not indifferent, but he said, whatever happens, happens. And yesterday asked, what does the general population, now it's hard to kind of grasp the general population as a whole, but he wants to know, what does the general population of Taiwan actually want to happen? Like, what ideally, if you look at the next 5 to 10 years, what would they wish for?
I think, of course, they're very practical about what they can wish for. So their biggest wish is to maintain the status quo, maintain the current way of life, and ensuring that China is not going to encroach the freedom that they're enjoying right now, or the rights that they enjoy under the democratic system over here. But at the same time, they don't necessarily expect that more countries are suddenly going to turn around and recognize Taiwan as a country, because that has never been the way since 1979, after the U.S. Switched the diplomatic recognition from Taiwan to China. And so I think for them, more concrete support from different countries, even if it's not diplomatic recognition, means a lot more than these countries trying to use Taiwan as a way to make any political gains domestically. So there's also a very, I think, interesting perception about Pelosi's visit. I think more Taiwanese people still view the visit as a positive way to show that the U.S. is still committed to engage with Taiwan at such a high level. They obviously, a lot of the domestic discussions in the U.S. Matters a lot less for them, because, I mean, for them, when they see a very high-level official visit and show up in front of their eyes, that's the proof of the U.S. support. They would think a lot less about, how those moves might be interpreted back in the U.S. Domestically.
You said most Taiwanese do want to keep the status quo the way it is, maintain the status quo, and that's what the president has also been saying in a lot of her tweets. But doesn't it bother Taiwanese at a certain level when the WHO, I think you may have seen this clip that we just played, that the World Health Organization itself can't recognize that Taiwan is an independent country with its own rules, that it treats it as if the pandemic in Taiwan is the same as the one in China, even though they have completely different systems. And it would be absurd to think that whatever happens in China happens in Taiwan, and to treat them as the same thing on a level of public health. I mean, this is not a joke. People's lives are at stake. It's not just a formal diplomatic relationship. So does that bother them, that this is not part of the status quo, that they can get recognition?
I think it's just the same as Taiwanese people accepting the fact that whether a war is going to happen or not is not really in their control. They I think we all know very well that the control of whether Taiwan can regain access into the WHO, not even as a full member, but as an observer, is in the hands of Beijing. So instead of actually trying to get very, very worked up over something that Taiwan doesn't really have any control with, I think people rather, trust the government using more creative ways to help Taiwan to have more access to share information from other friendly countries that are willing to share the information with Taiwan, but at the same time, they trust the government for being more, I think, proactive when there are signs that maybe another pandemic or epidemic is on the rise. So, for example, in the past few days, there's actually another new virus that was just being spotted inside China. And Taiwan's CDC immediately alert the population here, and they started sharing some of the information that they can gather. That was also the same way that Taiwan handled the emergence of the pandemic of COVID in more than 2 years ago, which is why Taiwan was decided that they're going to shut its border for the early stage and try to prevent the spread of the virus within the border. And that's also why I think Taiwan was able to actually achieve its early success, and its model actually was studied or being a lot of countries send representatives to Taiwan to try to get more experience from Taiwan's way of dealing with the pandemic. So I think it's just coming back to how Taiwanese people view these lack of access to international organizations. I think at the end of the day, they of course hope that there will be one day a way to convince Beijing to let Taiwan and China coexist in these organizations that have very little to non-political meanings, right? Because it's public health, it's the organization that will be focusing on the welfare of people's health. But at the same time, I think they know very well that under Xi Jinping's role, that is becoming more and more unlikely, because what China now is really trying to do is to squeeze the space for Taiwan to have any kind of meaningful international participation.
Right, while it may not be political, China can still use that as a wedge and a way to put pressure on Taiwan politically.
Now, we have our very own super user in Taiwan as well, Jonathan Fung, and he says life in Taiwan is more or less unaffected by the drills. So getting another impression in there. One of the things I was kind of interested in, something that Josh asked, is basically maybe talking about the Taiwanese military and what role it plays, and maybe understand from you, William. I saw a report, I think, in our colleagues from the ARD that were kind of suggesting that, okay, they are taking it seriously, and there are more and more people at least trying to learn on how to use a gun. They're kind of revisiting where the bunkers are. So is that something where you see a popularity rise, where people just kind of think about it more and just from a people's perspective think, okay, eventually I need to prepare for it, so maybe let's just think about it more. Let's do a ABC on how to use a gun?
I think the rise of people's awareness that they need to be familiarized with the basic, weapons, or how to at least know to operate them was triggered by the Russian invasion in Ukraine. So after February, we start seeing a lot more private companies with the legal license to actually run these kind of weapons boot camps, to start seeing a surge of signups for participants and normal citizens to use their off time from work or on their weekends to go participate in these kind of boot camps. And there are also organizations pushing to increase people's knowledge about first aid kind of treatment, because in battlefields, they felt like most Taiwanese people actually are not really knowledgeable enough to know how to save other people who got injured or who in a combat situation. So these kind of workshops have also become very popular over the last few months. So I think when people look at or read about information or news about the military exercise this time, there's definitely, I think, a growing awareness compared to past Chinese military exercise because of, I think, the fact that they still know that the potential of a war is always going to be looming at the back of their mind. But like if they can start acquiring more basic skills that will become useful in a situation where China decided to invade, then they would want to equip themselves with those kind of I think skills. And so I think there is a catalyst, which is the Russia war in Ukraine. I mean, obviously there's still like a lot of parallels that can't really be compared together, but at the same time I think that scenario and the scenes and the unity that they see from the Ukrainian people have really shown. And another interesting sign is that Taiwan has recently launched a very new reservist training program that is a lot more robust and a lot more concrete with its training content. And a lot of Taiwanese people have actually volunteered or at least hope to draw into those trainings because they felt like this is the time to actually increase their actual skill sets in knowing how to operate and where to stand and what function they can play in a real combat situation.
But William, I mean, one thing about some of the voluntary organizations or the NGOs that are teaching first aid or even people learning how to use air guns, actually, because there are such strict rules about shooting in Taiwan, shooting ranges rather, but is that we're really talking about just a few thousand people. I mean, we don't have hard numbers maybe. I mean, maybe you do, but it's my sense, and I was also in Taiwan recently, as you know, just very recently, actually. Pelosi was coming in. We were going out. That's just a few thousand among 23 million people, right? And number two, I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about, you were talking about, increasing the reservists, but just about the conscription, right? All men need to serve for 4 months. That's not a lot of time. And based on conversations I've had with people who've done their duty of 4 months, they don't learn really how to use a gun much. They learn how to clean a gun, but there's not even enough bullets in some cases to do shooting practice. And another way of putting it is some people have said it's pretty much 4 months of push-ups. They don't feel like they're getting their time in the military and really learning how to defend the country. Talk a little bit more about that.
We have no sound currently.
I think you might be muted, or we've muted him.
I hope it's neither.
Looks good on our side.
So I think what's already, until we get William sorted, I think what stands out for us is that there's an ambiguity as well, right? There is definitely in some parts this, okay, we need to get prepared, but as you said, as you probably also know better than us, this is not big numbers. It's not like the population of Taiwan is like, oh, we need to get to the arms and we can learn it. There's a few of them, but strategically, Taiwan has kind of maybe made a mistake to tone down, especially learning drills and getting kind of equipped to this. Okay, you are in a country that is at some point perhaps going to get into a military occupation. A 4-month conscription, it's not enough, basically.
Well, I mean, it used to be longer, right?
Yeah.
It used to be 2 years, and then they kept reducing it, and now it's at 4 months. And that's something, actually, from the U.S. perspective, people in D.C. have also expressed privately to the Taiwanese government, like, you're not taking your own security seriously if, you are not doing, and some of the things that Bonnie had said, right? Like, Taiwan's not looking at, maybe they have looked at Finland, but they're not employing or deploying some of the preparations that people in Finland have, right? Or looking at South Korea's conscription service, or looking at, frankly, the Israelis, right?
But I wonder how much that has to do with Taiwan's belief that the U.S. would come to their defense. Because no matter how strong Taiwan is militarily, it wouldn't be able to stand up alone to Beijing for an invasion from China. So perhaps the thinking is that, well, if we have the U.S. having our backs, then we don't need to prepare to defend ourselves by ourselves, which is, we've done the comparison with Ukraine. Ukraine knew for a long time that it was on its own, that it wasn't a member of NATO, it wouldn't get any military involvement from the U.S., whereas Taiwan is calculating with a different outcome.
I mean, certainly there are people in Taiwan who take that point of view. It's a very dangerous point of view, right? Because we just don't know. I mean, Bonnie believes that the United States will, when it actually comes to it, step in, but we just don't know. And imagine if it was a president like Trump, who, seemed to have no compunction, America first, right? So no compunction in terms of throwing allies under the bus. Is William back?
He's not yet, but I actually have a question to fill in from the community. Territory Specifics, Daryl Mentro, great name, asks, given the aggressiveness of the CCP, how has Taiwan kept control of the, I think it's pronounced Jinmen and Matsu, given the closeness of those islands to the mainland? So basically explaining, Taiwan is not just the one main island, there's several other small islands, and some of them are very close to the Chinese mainland.
Really close. Jinmen is just the closest point to China is 1.2 miles away.
So you can look over on the other
I've been
side.
to Jinmen. You can see it. You can see China from there. So, I mean, look, I think part of the reason...
We have a map as well.
There we go. Zoom in, because it's totally crazy. It's totally crazy, guys.
The five-star restaurants on Jinmen?
That is the island, and is way more closer to mainland China than it is to
Lesbos in Turkey or something.
Taiwan.
You can really swim across the distance.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I have to confess I'm not in a position to answer it fully. I'm not fully focused on Taiwan's military, but I would say that one reason is that it would constitute an act of war. It would vastly escalate, the tensions on the strait. I suppose that the reality is Taiwan probably wouldn't be able to do much. I believe there's a battalion there, but it would be easily overwhelmed. It would really... it would really raise tensions. And the other thing, some people have figured that if China was going to do something that escalatory, it might as well head straight to Taiwan.
Now, one thing I actually want to mention there is...
On the map, can you close the side tab?
Well, we don't have the map anymore. One thing I want to mention is we, in the research of this, saw that there's a lot of wargaming. So basically simulating a scenario of war. And we actually have prepared a video, which was on Weibo, which is the Chinese version of
Weibo,
Facebook.
yeah.
Weibo. We want to clarify, the user is not Chinese government. It's not anything official in that sense, but it shows that there's somewhat of a popularity almost, because the video has I think 200,000, more than 200,000 views. Maybe we can switch to that and just kind of for you guys to have an impression of how this actually looks.
So it's basically a Chinese user who created a scenario for invasion of Taiwan.
So a Chinese user made a simulation in 2020 of an invasion of Taiwan. Just for the viewers to see how this looks. So there we have. So they kind of just outline different vessels and jets and, what kind of strategic things they're going to attack first, what follows afterwards, who's going to come in later. We have a great analysis by our very own Richard Walker, who actually played out the different scenarios of, how this could play out. I actually want to talk less about the scenarios and more about this sort of popularity and in sort of on the Chinese side, where they stand on this in terms of the people, and especially the youngest generation.
Kind of fantasizing about a military invasion of Taiwan, which is a little bit
so
creepy.
One of the things that people don't understand is that the younger generation in China is actually more hawkish and more nationalist than their parents. You have to think in the 1980s, China was, this is pre-Tiananmen Square, right? There was an opening up in terms of intellectual exchange. It was a period when people felt like they could start expressing themselves, and there was a lot of hope in terms of the direction politically that China could possibly move in. So those are the parents. After Tiananmen Square, Beijing and the government decided we can't have any of that. We need to instill more what they call patriotic education. So usually it's the other way around, right? The parents are more conservative and nationalist wherever they are, and the kids could care less. In China, it's really flipped. The younger generation, the millennials, the Gen Z, they are much more nationalist. And so that video that you just saw, gaming out a possible invasion, does not surprise me. As I said earlier, you know, Taiwan is one of those topics in China where even a very, very progressive, socially progressive Chinese could be like, I'm for LGBTQ rights, but oh, Taiwan is a part of China. Mm-hmm. Like, no talk about, you know, self-determination, the feelings and views of people in Taiwan. So yeah, it's scary. I think people need to understand that the nationalism, to a large extent, is a creation of the Chinese propaganda authoritarian state, and they've created a population of people who want to see Taiwan absorbed into China at any cost.
What we've talked about earlier is the way that the opinion in Taiwan itself has also changed over the generation. You've seen a lot more people identify as Taiwanese rather than Chinese. You've seen a lot more people more reluctant to ever imagine unification with China, with Beijing and the politics of Beijing, who are very pro-democratic, pro-democracy, and this is really, I guess, the second generation that has grown up with a democracy rather than a military dictatorship. So it's really changed in the last few years, too. And my question is, what about the people who do still feel connected to China? Is this something that people talk about there? Is the opinion taboo, or do people talk about it openly, that they do fantasize one day of becoming part of the greater Chinese
demographically, it tends to be really old people now, septuagenarians, octogenarians, right? People who came from or were children of people who came from mainland China. But it's a dwindling group of people. There is a unification group of people that most people in Taiwan consider extremists. They'll show up for protests and all of that. And, you know, Taiwan is a free society. You can protest however you want. So, yeah, I mean, most people, even the political party that is not in power right now, that has been traditionally viewed as more friendly to China, it is the political party of the prior authoritarian state in Taiwan. Even they have made clear that they want to be left alone. And do not see a pathway to unification. And certainly the other thing that's worth mentioning is Hong Kong, right? Like, so the one country, two systems, that line was actually applied to Taiwan before it was ever applied as a concept to Hong Kong, way back when in the early 1980s, when the British and the Chinese hammered out an agreement to hand Hong Kong back over. So that has not worked out very well for the people of Hong Kong, and the people of Taiwan has taken notice.
Yeah, it sent a sign to Taiwan what can happen when Beijing decides to move in.
Absolutely.
When they want to do it, they want to do it. Now, we have many questions from the chat. Some of them even go way more basic, but I understand, because in the chat there's people writing the PRC, the ROC, and Raysan asks, what's the difference between the PRC and the ROC? Which I understand, if you only read those three letters, you're like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, People's Republic of China, which is Beijing, and Republic of China refers to Taiwan because, again, I'm sure a lot of people tuning in, 90 minutes ago probably weren't around for my explanation. But, there was a civil war in China. The losers retreated to Taiwan, and they established what they considered the true representative government of China, Republic of China, Free China, so to speak. And so that is the residual. So Taiwan is a place of contradictions and weirdness, right? Like, its official name is the Republic of China. That's confusing. Doesn't make sense to a lot of people. Even its flag, the emblem is the emblem of the Kuomintang, the KMT, one of the parties in Taiwan, but certainly not representative of everyone. So, there are residuals of stuff that happened in the 20th century that has stuck.
Yeah, and I just want to acknowledge that I think we've lost our correspondent in Taipei, William Yang. We want to thank him for joining us, and we apologize.
We've been trying to reestablish a connection with him, but unfortunately we just can't.
His sound went out, and then we lost connection with him, but We want to thank everybody for asking questions to him, get a feel for what's it like on the ground in Taiwan now that it's the biggest escalation in tensions in the last 25 years. And that's the focus of our show, looking at what is preventing China from invading Taiwan. We're still with Melissa Chan. We have time for a few more questions. She was just recently in Taiwan, too, so she can also talk to the situation on the ground. Because the last part of our show, we kind of want to emphasize that the people who gain to lose the most and win the most, depending on the outcome of this situation, the tensions in the Taiwan Strait, are the Taiwanese people themselves.
And maybe it kind of fits now very perfectly. We might have lost William for now, but we have our very own Jonathan Fung, who is in Taiwan, and he's asking actually one of the last big endgame question. He wants to know, Melissa, what's the best course of action under these circumstances that we have right now? Let's say the status quo for Taiwan. Where to go almost?
I mean, that was a question I also asked Bonnie, and I think it's hard. I think Taiwan just needs to stay the course, stick with the status quo, continue practicing democracy, to have democratic elections, invest in its people, and I do think, yeah, I mean, one thing is with the Pelosi visit, again, there's a tendency to frame everything as a U.S.-China issue. What does the U.S. want? What does China want? And what was really interesting in that entire narrative coming out of D.C. in terms of the furor over, like, Pelosi was no one really thought and stopped to ask what Taiwan wanted. So I think that, the fact that Pelosi went is because she was invited, and that it meant a lot to the people of Taiwan, as William said. There's going to be a cost, so that'll be really interesting to see how it plays out in terms of how people in Taiwan feel whether it was worth the cost. China immediately slammed sanctions, and of course economic sanctions on certain products in Taiwan, and of course Taiwan trades heavily with China, and also there are the continued military exercises that have been far more aggressive than in the past. Yeah.
I think, I mean, just to explain the background of, I think, why a lot of people's minds are turning toward the big global perspective is because we've seen a shift in the past few years with Trump becoming elected, with retreating from the global stage a bit militarily. We've seen the U.S. withdraw from Afghanistan, and then we've seen the power of Russia and China grow at the same time. And you have, there's also a chorus in the U.S. for saying we need to engage with them, we need to maintain U.S. supremacy in the world. Then we saw recently Russia do something that seemed unthinkable just a year ago, which is to invade Ukraine. And so we're kind of locked in this idea that the world has shifted to a struggle between great powers again, which is something that left the debate for many years, especially since the 90s when Fukuyama declared the end of history, and we all thought that this was it. We'd had a status quo, a global status quo, which we all could agree was the best course of action. And we see a lot of shifts now. But I think this is my last Ukraine-Taiwan comparison. I know there's so many things we can't compare, but I think what is important to understand in the conflict there is it does matter what Ukraine wants. It does matter. Even if you're not a global actor, you have so much power when you believe in something that you can see that Ukraine completely thwarted the plans of Russia. Russia thought it was going to move in and take Ukraine within a matter of days, and I think that it might be a calculus that China is banking on too, but it does matter if Ukraine says, no, we are a country and we are going to persist, we're going to continue to exist. And so I think that this isn't a moment of global major powers, military powers can do whatever they want. I think there is still a balance between idealism and materialism, if you want to get philosophical.
I mean, I think the analogy is useful. I mean, it's great that we're careful about making that analogy with Russia, Ukraine, and China, Taiwan, but it is a fact that President Tsai Ing-wen of Taiwan has herself made that analogy, and precisely in the same way that you just expressed, which is she said just a couple of days after the start of the invasion that the same way that Ukrainians are willing to defend their country, that is how Taiwan is prepared to do so, and Taiwanese are prepared to do so.
Now, as we're winding down, I just want to maybe revisit some of the things that we have maybe talked about in the last hour and a half, because for someone tuning in now, they're like, whoa, this is so many questions I had. The main question we had been asking ourselves was, why hasn't China invaded Taiwan yet? And what are the reasons they haven't done so? And maybe For anyone who missed a couple of these points, can we maybe summarize 3 of them, or maybe try our best to kind of just visit?
What's your favorite 3 reasons?
I mean, I would say we should just rewind and go back to what Bonnie said, because she's the preeminent expert on Taiwan, in my humble opinion, in the English language world. But, you know, one of the top things she said is that there is one possibility for there not being a hot war is the fact that Beijing would prefer not to, right? If there's any other way to do it peacefully or semi-peacefully, they would take that option. And that's one thing that you have seen as a strategy over the years, is China really encouraging trade between Taiwan. I mean, actually, TikTok actually factors in this too as well, because TikTok is a Chinese company. A lot of people in Taiwan are using it. There's been a lot of concern among people who study disinformation and misinformation that a lot of the content is coming from China. Both places speak Mandarin Chinese, but the script is different in China, mainland China versus Taiwan. And so you're seeing a lot of people in Taiwan, because everything is global now and they're engaging with content over their borders, learning the simplified way of writing, which is the People's Republic of China way of writing. So you're seeing this is like a win for China, right? Like learning how to write the way they do, as opposed to the traditional Chinese characters. So all these little things, creating cultural connections, creating economic connections, I think Beijing would prefer to see that as a way of getting in. But I think it lost a lot of that through what I just said in terms of what happened in Hong Kong. And maybe Xi Jinping also feels like he's running out of time.
So essentially, there's still an interest on the part of Beijing, on the part of Taipei, and on the part of Washington, D.C. to maintain a status quo, that they're all benefiting from it somehow, and they don't want to.
That should answer yesterday's question as well.
Frankly, the only player in those 3 that do not want to maintain the status quo ultimately
is China.
Exactly.
Is China. So yesterday, there doesn't have to be a conflict necessarily in the foreseeable future. Ideally, obviously, for most people to play out would definitely be without conflict. No need for loss there. I think, yeah.
And one thing, I mean, not to end on sorry.
Dark note.
I want to preface it. No, I mean, we were talking about this earlier. We were thinking about topics for the show a while ago, and one thing that came up is that today is Nagasaki Day. So it was the day 77 years ago when the U.S. dropped an atomic bomb on Nagasaki, Japan, essentially ending World War II, but with the loss of a lot of lives. And since that moment, we've been in a nuclear era. And I think that does remain in the background of any conflict. And a deterrent for a conflict nowadays, especially between nuclear powers like China and the U.S., is that we can't afford to fight a war on that scale. And I think hopefully that is in the minds of most world leaders. I would hope that it's part of the calculus of Xi Jinping, and I know that it is certainly for Biden. And we, as people who live on this planet, we kind of have to hope that they are concerned that a nuclear war would not be good for anybody.
Yeah, and I think really quickly, you had said earlier about like you had asked a question in terms of like why hasn't the U.S. responded? Like, shouldn't it, and isn't it perhaps interpreted as a weakness? The U.S. in decline. I would say actually it's the U.S. at its greatest in terms of responsibility. It would absolutely be irresponsible for the United States to respond in any way militarily at this point. So I think this was, the United States gets a lot of criticism deservedly. But in this instance, I think that they are trying to bring down the temperature, and that's good of them.
Great videos that we've mentioned in the chat. You can just scroll through the chat and find all the DW News stuff that we've kind of outlined, and all the experts, all the analysis is in there. And I want to thank the chat, because that was amazing. We had so many comments and questions that it really make the show really engaging.
Yeah, and I think our community is getting even better at following how the show is going too. I feel like it's better. It's better Yeah, I don't know. I think it's them making this show better. That's how I want to put it.
That's the way we love it. Yeah.
But we are going to be back next week. We're here every week at 8 p.m. Central European Time, 2 p.m. New York time. That's Eastern Standard Time. And we're going to take on another news topic next week. You guys can always get in contact with us and suggest something. We love to do that. Follow your lead on what we should talk about. And, of course, we want you guys to join us there so you can give us your questions. That's what we do here. We're News Desk from DW. And thank you to Melissa Chan for being with us and the whole team here on the news desk. That's us. This is the news desk.
And very important, if you have any suggestions on what you want to see and what you want to see us improve as well, feel free to comment. We're not going to be mad at you in the next week. I'm going to be there. Amin's not going to be there. And I just want to know, what would you like to see where the show goes? Because it really is about what you guys want. So feel free to comment.
And on that note, signing off.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.